This is the Prep Zone. Welcome once again as we're joined now by Mark Giannotto of the Washington Post. Some big news to talk about, Mark, is Frank Beamer, of course, legendary coach of Virginia Tech, announced earlier this week he is retiring at the season's end. You cover the team for about 5 years. Tell me a little bit about the man.
Well, Frank Beamer, he is kind of what you see is what you get. He's an everyman. He's kind of a throwback in this era of college football. You're not going to see a head coach last for 29 years at one school, let alone his alma mater. And, he always said, he'd know when the right time was for Virginia Tech to retire. And obviously, he felt this year, I think maybe in his heart of hearts, he probably wanted to go maybe another year or two and get the program back to sort of the footing it was on for so long as a burgeoning power in the Mid-Atlantic. But I think he didn't want to divide the Virginia Tech fan base, and he said all along he would have his finger on the pulse in terms of when the right time was, and I do think he really did. He delivered on his promise, and really, I think he's doing this for the best for Virginia Tech. I think in his heart he knows this is probably what's best for Virginia Tech, even though I think he wants this team to return back to sort of the level it was 5-10 years ago.
It's a team that struggled a little bit this season. They haven't had the wins and loss record that maybe they would hope, of course, starting out the season with Ohio State. And say instead of they're 4-5, if they're 7-2, you think he's sticking around for next season, maybe one after that?
I think he was really excited about this team. They have Michael Brewer at quarterback. They had some nice pieces, offensive weapons, and I really think if he, in his heart of hearts, he wanted to stay one more year next year when they play this big game at the Bristol Motor Speedway and play Tennessee, play at Notre Dame, a school he hasn't played against before. I think this probably isn't the perfect ending for him, but it's also not kind of the sour ending you saw at Florida State with Bobby Bowden, at Penn State with Joe Paterno. He didn't stay too long, and I think really ultimately that's what he wanted, and I think he'll be remembered for far more than just these last 4 years. I mean, he turned Virginia Tech into a school that not many people outside of Southwest Virginia had heard of into a national brand name. And you look at some of the openings that are already there in college football right now, and Virginia Tech is mentioned as one of the best openings available. 29 years ago, that's not the case. Frank Beamer built this job up into one of the premier jobs in the country. And, I think a lot of Hokie fans are indebted to him for that.
Mark Giannotto of the Washington Post talking about Frank Beamer here on the Prep Zone. And you had a piece on this in the Washington Post. I believe it ran on the website last night, in the paper this morning. How does this affect the recruiting of this area? Of course, Virginia Tech, they come up here to the DMV quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, Virginia Tech has had a established recruiting base here in the D.C. area. They recruit Northern Virginia really well. They have a commit from Prince George's County right now. And it's going to be really interesting how this changes the landscape around the area, because the bottom line is Virginia Tech hasn't had a new coach in 29 years. We're not really sure how people are going to react to not seeing Frank Beamer, but the thing is, the recruiting landscape around here is going to change dramatically no matter what. Maryland's looking for a new coach. Virginia could be in the market for a new coach soon. So I do think it's going to have an effect, but time's going to tell. It's going to be who does Virginia Tech hire. Is it Rich Rodriguez? Is it some of the other names we've seen out there? That's going to really determine how the landscape changes in the D.C. area.
Gut feeling, do you think they lose any recruits?
I don't think so. I think the AD at Virginia Tech, Whit Babcock's been very proactive. He's already called up every recruit that's committed. There's 4 from the D.C. area right this year. Miles Wolfuck, a defensive back from Wise. Eric Kuma, a wide receiver from Forest Park. Reggie Floyd, a defensive back from Stonewall Jackson. And Clay Dean, a defensive lineman from Woodgrove. I think most of those recruits are going to stay in the fold, just because by the time Virginia Tech hires a new coach in December, it's pretty late in the recruiting process. A lot of schools have their classes filled up. And then I think another question is how much of Frank Beamer's existing staff remains. If Bud Foster, the renowned defensive coordinator, sticks around, that could sway some recruits as well. So it's going to kind of be a sprint probably for Virginia Tech here, especially if they make a bowl game, because that's going to just delay the recruiting process even more. But I don't think they'll lose too many recruits over this, provided they make the right hire, and that's a big question mark right now.
Well, regardless, it's the end of an era with Frank Beamer leaving Virginia Tech at the end of the season. Mark Giannotto, The Washington Post, thanks so much for joining us today.
No problem.